The aroma of cilantro and poblano peppers filled the air in the kitchen of Heavenly Flavors restaurant in the heart of New York City. Knives rhythmically chopped on cutting boards, while pots bubbled with promises of exquisite flavors. In the midst of this culinary frenzy, a tall, elegant figure walked through the swinging doors. Victoria Thompson, with her ebony skin and dark eyes full of determination, surveyed the scene with a mixture of nostalgia and apprehension. It had been years since she'd set foot in her father's kitchen, the legendary chef Alexander Thompson. Now, after his sudden death, she was back, ready to face a challenge she never imagined. "Can I help you with something?" A sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. Ethan Vargas, the executive chef, looked at her with barely disguised disdain. Victoria took a deep breath, remembering her father's peculiar will. For a month, she had to work undercover at the restaurant, under the pseudonym of Lucy Connor. It was the condition for inheriting the business. "I'm Lucy Connor," she responded firmly. "I'm here for the apprentice position." Ethan scrutinized her from head to toe, his gaze lingering on her dark skin. "Do you have experience in fine dining?" "I have passion and a willingness to learn," Victoria answered, suppressing her irritation. She knew her background in business administration far exceeded what was needed to run the restaurant, but now she had to pretend to be a novice. "Fine," Ethan grunted, "but let's be clear. Things are done my way here. Old Thompson is gone, and I'm in charge." Victoria felt her heart sink hearing Ethan refer to her father as Old Thompson. She nodded silently, vowing to uncover what was really happening at Heavenly Flavors. As the day progressed, Victoria noticed subtle changes in the restaurant's atmosphere. The cooks seemed tense, working mechanically instead of with the passion her father had always encouraged. In a corner, she saw a young chef, Fiona, discreetly experimenting with a sauce. Ethan approached her, his voice a threatening hiss. "What do you think you're doing? I've told you 1,000 times I don't want innovations. We stick to the established menu." Fiona lowered her head, murmuring an apology. Victoria frowned, remembering how her father had always encouraged creativity in the kitchen. Later, while cleaning the kitchen, Victoria overheard a conversation between two cooks. "Have you heard the rumors about the secret fund?" one whispered. "Shh," the other replied, looking nervously around. "Don't talk about that here. Ethan has ears everywhere." Intrigued, Victoria discreetly moved closer. The cook, who she later learned was named Mark, looked at her suspiciously. "You're the new girl, right?" he asked. "Be careful. Things have changed a lot since Chef Thompson left." Victoria nodded, storing the information for later. It was clear there was much more at stake than simple menu changes. At the end of her first day, exhausted and with her head spinning, Victoria returned to her apartment. She collapsed on the couch, opening her father's old notebook that she had found among his belongings. The pages were filled with innovative recipes and notes about trusted suppliers, but in the last entries, Victoria noticed a change. There were cryptic notes about accounts that didn't add up and suspicions of betrayed loyalties. With a shiver, Victoria realized that her father had already distrusted Ethan before he died. What dark secrets lurked in the kitchens of Heavenly Flavors? As night fell over New York City, Victoria promised herself she would uncover the truth no matter the cost. For her father's legacy, for the future of the restaurant, and for her own place in a world that seemed determined to exclude her, she would fight with all her strength. What she didn't know was that this fight would lead her to confront not only her own demons, but a network of corruption and prejudice that threatened to destroy everything her father had built. The alarm went off at 5 a.m., and Victoria got up with renewed determination. She looked at herself in the mirror, preparing for another day as Lucy. Today, she promised herself, she would begin to unravel the mysteries surrounding Heavenly Flavors. Victoria's second day at Heavenly Flavors began with a frenzy of activity. The kitchen was buzzing with energy as the staff prepared for lunch service. Victoria, in her role as Lucy, moved cautiously between workstations, observing and absorbing every detail. Ethan entered the kitchen like a whirlwind, his presence causing a wave of tension. "Attention, everyone!" he shouted, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "We have an important critic coming today. If any of you ruin this, you can start looking for work at a food truck." Victoria noticed how the cook's shoulders tensed, the fear palpable in the air. This wasn't the collaborative and creative environment her father had fostered for years. While peeling potatoes, Victoria overheard Ethan arguing with the purchasing manager. "What do you mean we don't have the truffles?" he hissed. "I told you to get them at any price." "But sir," the employee protested, "the usual supplier refused to sell to us. He said something about late payments and..." Silence. Ethan looked around, making sure no one else had heard. "Find another supplier. And not a word about this to anyone, understood?" The incident left Victoria perplexed. Heavenly Flavors had always been known for paying its suppliers on time, cultivating relationships over years. What was happening with the restaurant's finances? Mid-morning, Victoria found herself working alongside Fiona, the young chef she had seen experimenting the day before. "You're new here, right?" Fiona asked quietly as they chopped vegetables side by side. Victoria nodded. "Yes, I just started yesterday. I'm Lucy." Fiona smiled weakly. "Welcome to hell," she murmured. "Things aren't what they used to be." "What do you mean?" Victoria pressed, seeing an opportunity. Fiona looked nervously around before responding. "Since Chef Thompson passed away, everything has changed. Ethan, he doesn't understand the vision we had before. He only cares about numbers, not passion for cooking." Before Victoria could inquire further, Ethan suddenly appeared. "What are you two whispering about?" he barked. "Less chat and more work." The rest of the morning passed in tense silence. Victoria observed how Ethan mistreated the employees, yelling at the slightest mistake and constantly belittling their skills. During lunch service, the food critic arrived. Victoria, from her position in the kitchen, could feel the tension in the air. Ethan supervised each dish with an almost manic intensity. However, halfway through the service, disaster struck. One of the main courses was returned, with the critic complaining that the meat was dry and flavorless. Ethan exploded. "Incompetence!" he roared, pointing at the grill chef. You're fired! Pack your things and get out!" The chef, a middle-aged man with tears in his eyes, protested. "But sir, I followed the recipe exactly as you changed it last week. Chef Thompson would never have..." "Chef Thompson is no longer here," Ethan shouted. "And if you don't leave right now, I'll make sure you never work in any restaurant in this city again." Victoria watched the scene in horror. Not only was Ethan changing her father's recipes, but he was also willing to destroy a chef's career over a single mistake. That night, while cleaning the kitchen, Victoria found herself with Mark, the cook who had mentioned the secret fund the day before. "What happened today was horrible," Victoria commented, trying to start a conversation. Mark nodded grimly. "And it's not the first time. Ethan, he's not like Chef Thompson. There are rumors that he's diverting money from the restaurant, but no one dares to investigate. The last person who did, well, let's just say they had an accident and no longer work here." Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. The situation was worse than she had imagined. Not only was her father's culinary legacy at stake, but there seemed to be a network of corruption and fear woven into the heart of Heavenly Flavors. As she left the restaurant that night, Victoria saw Ethan in a heated discussion with a man in a suit in the back alley. Although she couldn't hear the conversation, the panicked expression on Ethan's face and the wad of cash that changed hands told her everything she needed to know. Back in her apartment, Victoria took out her father's notebook and began to review the latest entries in more detail. Among the notes on recipes and suppliers, she found scribbles that looked like codes or account numbers. With renewed determination, Victoria vowed to get to the bottom of this mystery. For her father's legacy, for the future of Heavenly Flavors, and for all the employees suffering under Ethan's regime of terror, she would uncover the truth. What she didn't know was that each step she took brought her closer to a danger that went far beyond the walls of the kitchen. The third day dawned with a fine drizzle over New York City. Victoria arrived early at the restaurant, determined to continue unraveling the mysteries surrounding Heavenly Flavors. As she entered, she immediately noticed the absence of the grill chef who had been fired the day before. His workstation was occupied by a nervous young man who seemed lost among the pots and pans. Ethan suddenly appeared, his face a mask of false joviality. "Ah, Lucy," he said, pronouncing Victoria's fake name with a tone bordering on contempt. "Today you'll be working at the dessert station, and remember, no experiments, we stick to the menu." Victoria nodded silently, heading to her new position. As she prepared the ingredients for the day, she couldn't help but notice how Fiona, at the adjacent station, was watching her curiously. "Psst, Lucy," Fiona whispered when Ethan walked away. "Be careful. Ethan seems to have a special interest in you." "What do you mean?" Victoria asked, intrigued. Fiona looked nervously around before answering. "I heard him talking on the phone yesterday. He was asking about you, about your background. He seemed suspicious." Victoria's heart skipped a beat. Did Ethan suspect her true identity? She would have to be even more careful. Mid-morning, as Victoria prepared a batch of chocolates for the restaurant's signature dessert, she noticed something strange. The ingredients didn't seem to be of the quality Heavenly Flavors was accustomed to. The chocolate, in particular, lacked the rich and complex aroma she remembered from her father's creations. Curious, Victoria snuck into the pantry during her break. There, hidden behind the usual boxes, she found packages of a much cheaper brand. The label indicated they contained artificial flavorings and preservatives, something her father would never have allowed in his kitchen. As she examined the packages, she heard voices approaching. Quickly, she hid behind a shelf. "I'm telling you, Ethan, this can't continue," said a voice Victoria recognized as the restaurant's accountant. "The numbers don't add up. If we keep going like this, soon we won't be able to pay the suppliers." "Shut up," Ethan hissed. "I'll handle the numbers. You just make sure the books look in order. And not a word about this to anyone, understood?" The accountant mumbled an affirmative response before they both left the pantry. Victoria waited a few minutes before coming out of her hiding place, her mind reeling with this new information. Back in the kitchen, Victoria noticed Mark watching her. When he had the chance, he approached her. "I saw you were in the pantry," he whispered. "Did you find anything interesting?" Victoria hesitated for a moment before deciding to trust him. "The ingredients, they're not what they should be. And I heard Ethan talking about financial problems." Mark nodded grimly. "I suspected as much. Look, there's more at stake here than it seems. We need to talk, but not here. Can we meet after work?" Victoria agreed, her curiosity and concern growing equally. The rest of the day passed in a haze of tension. Victoria could feel Ethan's eyes on her, watching her every move. However, she stayed focused on her work, determined not to raise suspicions. When her shift finally ended, Victoria met Mark at a small cafe a few blocks from the restaurant. Fiona was there too, to her surprise. "We think you can be trusted," Mark began once they were seated. "Something very bad is happening at Heavenly Flavors, and we need help to figure out what it is." Fiona nodded. "Since Chef Thompson died, Ethan has been changing everything, not just the recipes and ingredients, but the very essence of the restaurant, and we believe he's stealing." "But why haven't you said anything?" Victoria asked, struggling to maintain her facade as Lucy. "Fear," Mark replied simply. "The last employee who questioned Ethan ended up in the hospital after an accident in the kitchen. No one dares to confront him directly." Victoria felt a mixture of horror and determination growing inside her. "What can we do?" "We need evidence," said Fiona. "Financial documents, recordings, something that proves what he's doing, but it's risky." "I'll do it," Victoria declared firmly. "I'll get that evidence." Mark and Fiona exchanged surprised looks. "Why would you risk yourself like that?" Mark asked. "You've only been here a few days." Victoria took a deep breath, considering her options. Finally, she made a decision. "Because this restaurant means more to me than you think. My name isn't Lucy. I'm Victoria Thompson, Chef Alexander Thompson's daughter, and I'm here to save my father's legacy." The silence that followed her declaration was deafening. Mark and Fiona looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and sudden understanding. "Now it all makes sense," Fiona murmured. "We're with you," Mark added with determination. "Together, we'll expose Ethan and save Heavenly Flavors." As night fell over New York City, the three conspirators began to plot their plan. What they didn't know was that the shadows lurking around the restaurant were deeper and more dangerous than any of them could imagine. The revelation of Victoria's true identity had changed the game. Now, with Mark and Fiona as allies, she felt stronger, but also more vulnerable. The weight of her mission had become even more palpable. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the restaurant with a mixture of determination and apprehension. She knew that every move she made now would be crucial. Ethan greeted her with his usual disdain, unsuspecting that beneath the facade of the inexperienced Lucy lay his greatest threat. "You'll be working on sauce preparation today," Ethan ordered. "And remember, no improvisations." Victoria nodded submissively, but her mind was already working on a plan. As she prepared the sauces, she discreetly observed Ethan's movements. She noticed how he disappeared into his office for long periods, always locking the door behind him. During her break, Victoria met briefly with Mark in the pantry. "We need to access that office," she whispered. "The documents that prove his corruption must be there." Mark nodded. "Fiona has been observing his routines. He usually goes out to smoke in the back alley around 3 p.m. It's our best chance." With a plan in mind, Victoria returned to her workstation. However, her concentration was interrupted by the arrival of a visibly upset supplier. "I demand to speak with Ethan," the man shouted. "I haven't received a full payment in months." Ethan quickly came out of his office, his face a mask of false concern. "Please, Mr. Ramirez, let's discuss this in my office privately." Victoria exchanged a meaningful look with Fiona. Something was definitely rotten in the finances of Heavenly Flavors. At 3 o'clock sharp, just as Mark had predicted, Ethan went out to the alley. Victoria acted quickly. With Fiona keeping watch, she slipped into the office. The door was locked, but Mark appeared with a master key. "We have 5 minutes maximum," he whispered. With trembling hands, Victoria began to search through the desk drawers. She found falsified invoices, receipts for payments to names she didn't recognize, and an accounting book that clearly didn't match the restaurant's actual income. But the most shocking discovery was a folder hidden in a secret compartment of the desk. It contained photos of Ethan with a well-known businessman, Anthony Vega, rumored to have connections to money laundering. Victoria quickly took out her phone and began photographing the documents. Her heart was racing, aware that each second brought her closer to the danger of being discovered. Just as she was finishing, they heard footsteps approaching. Victoria barely had time to close the drawers and exit the office before Ethan rounded the corner. "What are you two doing here?" he barked, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. I was looking for you, chef," Victoria improvised. "I have a question about preparing the Pasilla chili sauce." Ethan stared at her for a moment that seemed eternal. "Fine," he finally said. "Get back to your station. I'll explain it to you in a moment." Victoria nodded and walked away, her heart still racing. It had been close, too close. The rest of the afternoon passed in a fog of tension. Victoria could feel Ethan's eyes on her, more intense than ever. Did he suspect something? When her shift finally ended, Victoria met with Mark and Fiona at the same cafe as the night before. "What I found is worse than we imagined," she said, showing them the photos on her phone. "Ethan isn't just stealing from the restaurant, he's involved in something much bigger." Mark whistled softly upon seeing the photo of Ethan with Anthony Vega. "This is serious. Vega is dangerous." "If Ethan is working with him?" "We need more evidence," Fiona interrupted. "Something that directly links Ethan to illegal activities." Victoria nodded, her mind working at full speed. "Tomorrow is the monthly delivery from the main suppliers. If Ethan is diverting funds or products, that would be the time to do it." "It's risky," Mark warned. "If we're caught, we don't have a choice," Victoria said firmly. "It's our best chance to expose the whole operation." As they planned their next move, Victoria couldn't help but think about her father. Had Alexander suspected Ethan's true nature? Was that why he had left those strange instructions in his will? What Victoria didn't know was that at that very moment, Ethan was making a phone call that would change the course of events. "Mr. Vega," he said in a low voice, "we have a problem. I think someone is snooping around. I need you to take care of this permanently." As night fell over New York City, the threads of fate were interweaving, leading Victoria and her allies towards a confrontation that would test not only their courage, but their very survival. The morning of the 5th day dawned grey and threatening, as if the sky itself sensed the tension looming over Heavenly Flavors. Victoria arrived early, her heart beating with a mixture of determination and fear. Today was the day of the big monthly delivery, and she knew it would be her best opportunity to uncover the truth about Ethan's illegal activities. As she entered the kitchen, she immediately noticed that something was different. There were more staff than usual, including some faces she didn't recognize. Ethan seemed particularly agitated, barking orders and obsessively reviewing a list in his hand. "Lucy," he shouted when he saw her, "you'll be in charge of inventory today. I want you to note every box, every can, every damn grain of salt that comes through that door. Understood?" Victoria nodded, aware that this task would give her direct access to the information she needed. "Yes, chef," she responded, taking the clipboard Ethan handed her. As the morning progressed, delivery trucks began to arrive. Victoria watched attentively, noting every detail. However, something didn't add up. The quantities she was seeing didn't match what she remembered from the restaurant's normal operations when her father was in charge. At one point, she noticed that a particular truck stopped at the back of the restaurant, far from the main delivery entrance. Ethan quickly came out, exchanged a few words with the driver, and personally supervised the unloading of several unlabeled boxes. Victoria tried to approach, but Ethan stopped her abruptly. "You stay where you are," he barked. "This is a special order. It doesn't need to be inventoried." Intrigued and suspicious, Victoria sought Mark's gaze, who had been observing the scene from the kitchen. He nodded imperceptibly, indicating that he had also noticed the strange delivery. Mid-morning, during a brief break, Victoria managed to meet with Fiona in the pantry. "Something big is happening," Fiona whispered. "I heard Ethan talking on the phone. He mentioned something about a special shipment and that everything must be ready for tonight." Victoria frowned. "We need to find out what's in those unlabeled boxes. They could be the evidence we need." "But how?" Fiona asked. "Ethan keeps them locked in his office." Before Victoria could respond, the pantry door flew open. Ethan was there, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "What are you two doing here?" he growled. "Get back to work now!" Victoria and Fiona hurried out, exchanging worried glances. It was clear that Ethan was becoming increasingly paranoid. As the day progressed, the tension in the kitchen was palpable. Victoria noticed that several of the older employees seemed nervous, exchanging concerned looks when they thought no one was watching. During dinner service preparation, Victoria managed to sneak back into the pantry. This time, her goal was to review the records of previous deliveries. If she could find a pattern in the discrepancies, she would have solid proof of Ethan's embezzlement. As she quickly flipped through the files, a noise startled her. Turning around, she found herself face to face with one of the unfamiliar men she had seen that morning. "What do you think you're doing?" the man asked, his voice low and threatening. Victoria felt her heart stop. I was looking for the record of the last wine delivery," she quickly improvised. "Chef Ethan wanted to verify something." The man stared at her for a moment that seemed eternal. Finally, he grunted, "Get out of here. Now." Victoria didn't need to be told twice. She hurried out of the pantry, her mind spinning. It was clear that these new employees were there for something more than just helping with deliveries. When her shift finally ended, Victoria met with Mark and Fiona in an alley near the restaurant. She told them about the incident in the pantry and the strange deliveries she had observed. "This is bigger than we thought," Mark said, his face grim. "I think Ethan isn't just stealing from the restaurant. He could be using Heavenly Flavors as a front for something much worse." "We need concrete evidence," Victoria insisted, "and we need it tonight." "I have a feeling that if we wait any longer, it could be too late." Fiona nodded. "Ethan mentioned that everything must be ready for tonight. Whatever he's planning, it's going to happen soon." The three looked at each other, aware of the danger they faced. Finally, Victoria spoke. "I'm going back to the restaurant tonight. I need to see what's in those unlabeled boxes." "It's too dangerous," Mark protested. "If you're caught—" "It's a risk I have to take," Victoria interrupted. "This restaurant was my father's dream. I can't stand by and watch while Ethan destroys it." Reluctantly, Mark and Fiona agreed to help. They devised a plan. Mark would keep watch from outside, while Fiona would distract the security guard. As they prepared to set their risky plan in motion, none of them noticed the shadowy figure watching them from a distance, phone in hand. "Mr. Vega," the figure whispered. "We have a problem. The new girl, I think she knows more than she should." The response from the other end of the line was brief and decisive. "Take care of her. Tonight." The trap was set, and Victoria was about to walk right into it. The night promised to be long and dangerous, and the fate of Heavenly Flavors hung by a thread. Darkness descended upon New York City like a black velvet cloak. The silence in the streets near Heavenly Flavors was interrupted only by the occasional bark of a dog and the distant hum of nighttime traffic. Victoria, hidden in the shadows of a nearby building, watched the restaurant with a racing heart. "Are you sure about this?" Mark whispered beside her, his voice tinged with concern. Victoria nodded, her determination unwavering. "We have to do it. It's now or never." With one last exchange of glances, the plan was set in motion. Fiona approached the restaurant's main entrance, her casual gait hiding the nervousness she felt. As planned, she began chatting with the security guard, distracting him with an elaborate story about a supposed problem with her last paycheck. Taking advantage of the distraction, Victoria slipped towards the back of the building. Mark followed close behind, watching every corner and shadow. They reached the service door, and Victoria held her breath as she inserted the master key they had managed to duplicate. The soft click of the lock sounded like thunder in her ears, but the door opened smoothly. With one last glance at Mark, who nodded in support, Victoria ventured into the darkness of the restaurant. The interior was shrouded in shadows, illuminated only by the dim glow of emergency lights. Victoria moved cautiously, each step calculated to avoid making noise. Her goal was clear: Ethan's office and the mysterious unlabeled boxes. Upon reaching the office door, Victoria paused. She listened carefully, making sure the building was truly empty. Satisfied, she pulled out another key from her pocket, this time one she had managed to copy from Ethan's keyring during a moment of carelessness. The office was an organized chaos of papers and folders. Victoria headed straight for the cabinet where she had seen Ethan store the boxes. With trembling hands, she opened the doors. What she found took her breath away. The boxes contained carefully wrapped packages of what appeared to be cocaine. Alongside them were documents detailing distribution routes and lists of names Victoria recognized as some of the city's most prestigious restaurants. "Oh my God," she murmured to herself, "it's a complete distribution network." Quickly, Victoria began photographing everything with her phone. Every document, every package, every incriminating detail. Her mind was reeling with the implications of what she was discovering. Heavenly Flavors wasn't just a front for theft, but the center of a large-scale drug trafficking operation. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps. Suddenly the light came on, momentarily blinding her. "Well, well," said a familiar voice. "Looks like we have a rat snooping where it shouldn't." Victoria turned, her heart pounding. There in the doorway stood Ethan, and behind him, the face she had seen in the photographs, Anthony Vega. "Miss Thompson," Ethan continued, his voice dripping with venom. "Or should I say Lucy? You really thought you could fool us, didn't you?" Victoria backed away, desperately searching for an exit. "I know everything, Ethan. About the drugs, the money laundering, everything. You won't get away with this." Vega stepped forward, his imposing presence filling the room. "Foolish girl," he growled. "Do you really think you can stop us? This is bigger than you can imagine." At that moment, there was a commotion outside the office. Mark and Fiona burst into the room, closely followed by several men Victoria recognized as the new employees from that morning. "Victoria!" Fiona shouted. "Look out!" What followed was chaos of movement and shouts. Victoria took advantage of the confusion to lunge towards the door, narrowly dodging the hands trying to grab her. She ran through the restaurant's hallways, her heart pounding with the force of a war drum. Behind her, she could hear shouts and the sound of a fight. She desperately wondered if Mark and Fiona were okay, but she dared not look back. When she finally made it out to the street, the cold night air hit her like a slap. Without thinking twice, she ran towards the main avenue, blending in with the crowd of New York's nightlife. Only when she was sure no one was following her did Victoria allow herself to stop. Panting, she leaned against the wall of a building, her mind reeling with everything she had discovered and everything that had gone wrong. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands. The photos were there, the evidence she needed to expose the entire operation. But at what cost? Would Mark and Fiona be safe? As police sirens began to sound in the distance, Victoria knew that the real battle was just beginning. The night had brought revelations, but also dangers she never imagined. And now, with the weight of the truth on her shoulders, she would have to carefully decide her next move. The fate of Heavenly Flavors, her father's legacy, and perhaps even her own life, depended on it. Dawn found Victoria hidden in a small run-down motel on the outskirts of the city. She had spent the night wide awake, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The images of what had transpired at Heavenly Flavors kept replaying in her head like a horror movie. With trembling hands, she reviewed the photos on her phone once more. The evidence was there, clear and undeniable, but the weight of this truth overwhelmed her. What should she do now? Who could she trust? A knock on the door startled her, making her jump from the bed. Her heart was racing as she approached silently. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It's me, Victoria. Mark." Cautiously, she opened the door. There stood Mark, with a black eye and a cut on his lip, but alive. "Mark!" Victoria exclaimed, hugging him tightly. "Are you okay? What happened? Where's Fiona?" Mark quickly entered, closing the door behind him. "I'm okay, more or less." "Fiona, they have her." Victoria felt the ground open beneath her feet. "What? How?" Mark sat heavily on the bed, his face a mask of exhaustion and worry. "When we entered the office, everything turned into chaos. I managed to escape, but I saw them taking Fiona. Ethan, he said they would use her as insurance against you." Victoria collapsed next to Mark, the weight of guilt crushing her. "This is my fault. I should never have involved you in this." "No," Mark said firmly. "We all knew the risks, and now we have to find a way to save Fiona and expose Ethan and his network." Victoria nodded, gathering her determination. "You're right, but how? We can't trust the police. Who knows how far this web of corruption reaches?" At that moment, Victoria's phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "We have your friend. If you want to see her alive, come alone to the abandoned warehouse at 1234 Insurgent Street at 8 p.m. Bring all the evidence you have, no tricks." Victoria showed the message to Mark, her face pale. "It's a trap," he said. "I know," Victoria replied, "but we don't have a choice. I can't abandon Fiona." Mark looked at her intently for a moment before nodding. "You won't go alone, I have an idea." The next few hours were a frenzy of planning and preparation. Mark contacted some trusted former colleagues from the restaurant, explaining the situation. Several offered to help, outraged by the corruption that had infected Heavenly Flavors. Meanwhile, Victoria made backups of all the evidence and sent them to multiple secure email addresses. If anything happened to her, the truth would come to light one way or another. As the appointed time approached, Victoria felt a mixture of fear and determination. She looked at herself in the motel mirror, barely recognizing the woman who stared back at her. In just 1 week, she had gone from being a business executive to a fighter against organized crime. "Dad," she whispered, touching the necklace her father had given her years ago, "give me strength." At 7:45 p.m., Victoria arrived at the abandoned warehouse. The place was gloomy and desolate, perfect for a trap. With a firm step, she entered the building. In the center of the warehouse, illuminated by a single spotlight, was Fiona. Tied to a chair, she had marks of beatings on her face, but her eyes shone with fierce determination. "Victoria, no!" Fiona shouted when she saw her. "It's a trap!" From the shadows emerged Ethan and Vega, accompanied by several armed men. "Welcome, Miss Thompson," Vega said with a cold smile. "I hope you've brought what we asked for." Victoria took a step forward, holding her phone up high. "I have everything here. Now, let Fiona go." Ethan laughed. "Did you really think it would be that easy? You're as naive as your father." At that moment, there was a crash. The warehouse windows shattered and several masked figures burst into the place. They were the former employees of Heavenly Flavors, led by Mark. What followed was chaos of shouts, gunshots, and bodies in motion. Victoria ran towards Fiona, quickly untying her. Together, they snuck towards a side exit. Outside, the night was illuminated by the lights of police cars. Mark had contacted an honest detective he knew, providing him with all the necessary information to conduct a raid. As Ethan, Vega, and their accomplices were handcuffed and taken to the patrol cars, Victoria, Fiona, and Mark embraced, exhausted but victorious. "We did it," Victoria whispered, tears of relief running down her cheeks. But as she watched the criminals being taken away, Victoria knew this was just the beginning. Now came the hardest part, rebuilding Heavenly Flavors and restoring her father's legacy. The night had been long and dangerous, but the dawn promised a new beginning. With her friends by her side and the truth finally revealed, Victoria was ready to face whatever came next. The days following the dramatic raid were a whirlwind of police statements, press interviews, and long meetings with lawyers. Victoria, Mark, and Fiona found themselves at the center of a media storm, their brave exposure of the corruption network at Heavenly Flavors capturing the attention of all of New York. A week after the events, Victoria stood in front of the closed doors of the restaurant. The place that had once been her father's pride was now sealed with police tape, a silent reminder of the dark secrets that had been unearthed. "Ready?" Mark asked, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Victoria took a deep breath. "As ready as I can be." With a creak, the doors opened. The interior of the restaurant was exactly as they had left it on the night of the raid. Overturned tables, broken glass, and a sepulchral silence that contrasted dramatically with the bustle that used to fill the place. Fiona, who had joined them, let out a low whistle. "We have a lot of work ahead of us." And they certainly did. The following days turned into a frenzy of activity. Victoria, now officially in charge of the restaurant, immersed herself in the task of rebuilding not only the physical space, but also the reputation of Heavenly Flavors. The first item on her agenda was to meet with all the staff. Many were scared, confused, and betrayed by what had happened. Victoria, with Mark and Fiona by her side, spoke with honesty and passion. "I know you've been through a lot," she said, her voice firm but compassionate. "But Heavenly Flavors has always been more than just a restaurant. It's a dream, a family. And together we're going to rebuild it, better and stronger than ever." Little by little, the team began to unite under her leadership. Victoria implemented new transparency policies, ensuring that every employee had a voice in important decisions. Mark was named executive chef, his talent and loyalty finally recognized. Fiona, with her creativity and passion, became the head of culinary innovation. As they worked on the physical renovation of the restaurant, Victoria immersed herself in her father's old notebooks. Among recipes and notes about suppliers, she found the essence of what had made Heavenly Flavors so special, an unwavering dedication to excellence and a deep respect for rich culinary tradition. One day, while reviewing an old photo album, Victoria found an image that took her breath away. It was her as a child, sitting in the restaurant's kitchen, watching with wonder as her father prepared a dish. The joy in Alexander's eyes was palpable. With tears in her eyes, Victoria knew exactly what she had to do. The day of the grand reopening arrived sooner than anyone expected. The press crowded outside the restaurant, eager to see how Heavenly Flavors would rise from the ashes of scandal. Victoria, dressed in an elegant suit that combined traditional elements with a modern touch, cut the red ribbon. The doors opened, revealing a transformed interior. The walls, once austere, were now adorned with vibrant murals that told the story of culinary evolution. The kitchen, visible from the main dining room, was a spectacle of efficiency and creativity. And in the center of the restaurant, an enlarged photo of Alexander Thompson smiled at diners, a constant reminder of the legacy they were honoring. The menu, carefully designed by Mark and Fiona, was a celebration of traditional flavors with an innovative touch. Each dish told a story, from humble street food origins to sophisticated haute cuisine techniques. But the most impressive thing was the atmosphere. The staff moved with renewed energy, proud to be part of something bigger than themselves. The diners, a mix of loyal old customers and curious newcomers, murmured with approval at each dish served. That night, as the restaurant buzzed with activity, Victoria snuck into the kitchen. There, in the midst of controlled chaos, she paused for a moment to take it all in. The aroma of herbs and spices, so familiar and comforting, the sound of knives against cutting boards, the laughter and exclamations of satisfaction coming from the dining room. Mark approached, a tired but satisfied smile on his face. "We did it, boss." Victoria nodded, emotional. "Yes, we did. But this is just the beginning." And she was right. Heavenly Flavors had not only been reborn, but it had transformed into something even more special, a place where tradition met innovation, where each dish told a story, and where each employee felt valued and respected. As Victoria watched her team work in harmony, she knew she had honored her father's legacy in the best possible way. Heavenly Flavors was no longer just a restaurant. It was a symbol of resilience, of second chances, and of the unbreakable passion for good food. The road had been difficult, full of dangers and betrayals, but the end result was sweeter than any dessert on the menu. Heavenly Flavors had been reborn, and with it, Alexander Thompson's dream lived on stronger than ever. The months following the reopening of Heavenly Flavors were a whirlwind of activity and changes. The restaurant had not only regained its former glory, but had become a symbol of renewal and hope in New York City's culinary scene. Victoria, now fully established as the director of the restaurant, found herself facing new challenges every day. Her vision went beyond simply running a successful restaurant. She wanted to create a positive impact on the community and the industry as a whole. One sunny morning, while reviewing financial reports in her office, Victoria had an epiphany. She called Mark and Fiona for an urgent meeting. "I have an idea," she announced, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. "I want Heavenly Flavors to be more than a restaurant. I want it to be a center for training and opportunities." Mark and Fiona exchanged intrigued looks. "What do you have in mind?" Fiona asked. "A scholarship and internship program," Victoria explained. "We want to attract young talents from marginalized communities, especially women and people of color who normally wouldn't have access to fine dining." The idea was received with enthusiasm, and soon the team set to work to make it a reality. They established partnerships with local cooking schools and community organizations. Within weeks, Heavenly Flavors welcomed its first class of apprentices, a diverse group of young people passionate about cooking, but who had never had the opportunity to explore haute cuisine. Seeing these young people flourish in the kitchen filled Victoria with a satisfaction that rivaled any commercial success. She vividly remembered her own struggles to be taken seriously in a male-dominated world, and she vowed that these young people would have all the opportunities she had had to fight for. But not everything was rosy. As Heavenly Flavors gained recognition for its progressive initiatives, it also attracted attention from more conservative elements of the industry. Some traditional culinary critics murmured that the restaurant was sacrificing tradition on the altar of political correctness. Victoria faced these criticisms head-on. In an interview with a renowned gastronomic magazine, she declared, "Tradition is not static. It evolves, adapts, enriches itself with new perspectives. What we're doing at Heavenly Flavors is honoring our roots while looking to the future." Her firm stance and clear vision not only silenced the critics, but inspired other restaurants to follow her example. Little by little, Heavenly Flavors was becoming the epicenter of a movement of change in the New York culinary industry. One day, while supervising the kitchen during the busy dinner service, Victoria noticed something that filled her with pride. At each station, experienced chefs worked side by side with young apprentices. The air was filled not only with the delicious aromas of food, but also with laughter, words of encouragement, and the buzz of collaborative creativity. At that moment, Mark approached her with a mysterious smile. "I have a surprise for you," he said, guiding her towards the restaurant's entrance. There, to her amazement, was a group of her former business school classmates, the same ones who had once doubted her decision to get involved in the family business. "We came to see for ourselves the miracle everyone's talking about," one of them said, clearly impressed. As she gave them a tour of the restaurant, Victoria couldn't help but feel a mixture of pride and vindication. She had proven that it was possible to combine solid business management with a progressive social vision. That night, after the last customer had gone and the kitchen was clean and quiet, Victoria was left alone in the restaurant. She walked to her father's portrait and stared at it for a long moment. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "We not only saved your dream, we made it grow beyond what we imagined." As she turned off the lights and closed the doors, Victoria felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. Heavenly Flavors was not just a restaurant. It had become a beacon of change, a place where the flavors of the past blended with the promises of the future. And this was just the beginning. With each new day, With each new recipe and each new apprentice who passed through its doors, Heavenly Flavors was writing a new chapter in the rich culinary history of New York. A chapter of inclusion, innovation, and hope. Victoria smiled to herself as she walked towards her home in the New York night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and undoubtedly new flavors, and she was ready for all of it. A year had passed since the reopening of Heavenly Flavors, and the transformation was nothing short of astonishing. The restaurant had not only become one of the most acclaimed in New York City, but it was also internationally recognized as a model of culinary innovation and social responsibility. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, and Victoria had decided to close the restaurant for a special event. Guests began to arrive, renowned chefs, culinary critics, journalists, but also local suppliers, cooking students, and community members. They were all there to celebrate the first anniversary of Heavenly Flavors' rebirth. As guests mingled in the restaurant's back patio, converted into a vibrant local producers market for the occasion, Victoria observed the scene with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. Mark approached, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To an incredible year," he toasted, handing her a glass. Victoria smiled, clinking her glass with his. "And to many more to come." At that moment, Fiona appeared, accompanied by a group of young chefs. They were the graduates of Heavenly Flavors' first scholarship class, now employed at some of the best restaurants in the city. "Boss," Fiona said with a smile, "these kids want to thank you personally for the opportunity you gave them." One by one, the young chefs approached Victoria, sharing stories of how the program had changed their lives. Their eyes shone with gratitude and determination, and Victoria felt her heart swell with pride. As the afternoon progressed, Victoria gave an emotional speech, thanking everyone who had made Heavenly Flavors' rebirth possible. She spoke of her father, of his vision, and of how the restaurant had become much more than a business. It was a family, a school, a movement. "A year ago, we were on the brink of the abyss," she said. "But together, we not only saved Heavenly Flavors, we transformed it into something even greater. We have demonstrated that culinary excellence and social responsibility are not mutually exclusive, that we can honor our traditions while embracing change and diversity." Thunderous applause followed her words. Among the crowd, Victoria could see familiar faces, the former employees who had risked everything to help her expose the corruption, the new apprentices full of hope, and even some of the critics who had initially doubted her vision but were now among her most fervent defenders. After the speech, the celebration continued with a special tasting. Each dish told a story of tradition and innovation, of struggle and triumph. The menu was a journey through the history of Heavenly Flavors, from Alexander Thompson's classic dishes to the most avant-garde creations of the new generation of chefs. As the night wore on, Victoria found a moment to escape to the kitchen. In the relative silence, away from the bustle of the party, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She remembered that fateful night just over a year ago, when she discovered the truth about the corruption that had infected her father's legacy. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, but also the determination that had driven her to fight. And now, looking around the gleaming kitchen, hearing the laughter and conversations coming from the patio, Victoria felt a deep sense of fulfillment. They had faced the worst and had emerged stronger. At that moment, Mark and Fiona entered the kitchen. "We were looking for you," Fiona said. "There's someone who wants to see you." Intrigued, Victoria followed them back to the party. There, waiting for her, was Mr. James, the most respected culinary critic in New York. "Miss Thompson," the old man said with a warm smile, "I wanted to congratulate you personally. What you've achieved here is nothing short of extraordinary. You've redefined what it means to be a world-class restaurant in the 21st century." Victoria moved, thanked him for his words, but Mr. James wasn't finished. "I've been in this business for over 50 years, he continued, "and I can tell you without a doubt that Heavenly Flavors is not only the best restaurant in New York right now, it's a beacon for the entire global culinary industry." The critic's words spread quickly through the party, triggering a new round of celebrations. Victoria found herself surrounded by hugs, congratulations, and toasts. As the night came to an end and the last guests said their goodbyes, Victoria was left alone in the restaurant once more. She walked through the empty dining room, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She stopped in front of her father's portrait, which presided over the main hall. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "And this is just the beginning." With one last look at the restaurant, Victoria turned off the lights and closed the door. Outside, New York City shone under the stars, full of promises and possibilities. Heavenly Flavors had risen from the ashes, stronger and brighter than ever. And Victoria Thompson, the woman who had once doubted her place in this world, now stood as a symbol of perseverance, innovation, and positive change. As she walked towards her home, Victoria smiled. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new recipes to perfect, new lives to change. And she was ready for all of it, with the taste of success still fresh on her lips and the fire of passion burning bright in her heart.